I'm always learning something new, which is really awesome when you're dealing with something as complicated as the brain. And the same is absolutely 100% true in music.
What fuels a multi-passionate life? I'm Jessica Wan, and in this podcast, I interview people who straddle two completely different worlds. I call them ampersands, and we are collectively designing the Ampersand Manifesto. I am so excited to talk with Dr. Arie Perry. Arie is a singer who started singing in a rock band in high school, inspired by Journey and Rush, and then he caught the classical music bug. He's performed as a lyric tenor with a number of ensembles, including the San Francisco City Chorus, Oakland City Chorus, and American Bach soloists. Arie is also a physician and the chief of neuropathology at UCSF. Combining his vocal talents and medical expertise, he released an album called Neuropathology Songs to help his students remember salient features of common neurological disorders. Arie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jess. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Arie, we know each other from the singing world, and we've known each other kind of through our singing friends for a number of years. I had seen your email address, with UCSF and assumed, he's in the medical field. But I have to say, when I looked you up, I was taken aback, and I think I audibly said, whoa. Do you get that type of reaction sometimes from other people in the singing world?
Yeah, I think I do because, I don't often talk about what I do on a, daily basis. And I certainly have been in my field, my little subspecialty now for quite a while. And so I have a pretty long CV, but I don't really bring it up in daily conversation. So I think people are surprised sometimes.
I would love for you to introduce our listeners to neuropathology a little more, since I had to Google what it meant, and I still thought, I should probably just ask Arie. How do you typically talk about your field?
Yeah, it's often, kind of an awkward moment at a party or trying to explain what it is you do. But, the simplified version is that pathology is the study of disease, and neuropathology is then the study of disease of the nervous system. So that mainly includes the brain and the spinal cord, but also nerves and muscles as well. In my own area, I'm particularly interested in the diagnosis of brain tumors. And that's mainly where I've focused my expertise and my interests. But it's a pretty broad field, so, people can do quite a few different things, mostly in academics, but some people are in private practice. And even a few of our prior trainees are in industry. So there's a wide range of what people can do with pathology.
What does your weekday life kind of look like? Give us a glimpse into what it's like to be the chief of neuropathology at UCSF.
I guess, a lot of what I do is looking at tissue specimens under the microscope during the day. So that is the main way that I make diagnoses. And so the most common diagnosis is some form of cancer. So if somebody has a brain tumor, then the neurosurgeon will go in and take a biopsy, give us the tissue and pathology, and we'll generate slides, and I look at those under the microscope. Now, we have a lot more tools than we used to, so we also have what's called immunohistochemistry, where we do immune types of techniques to look for what proteins are expressed by the cancer cells. But mostly nowadays, the really hot thing is molecular pathology. So we look at the genetics of the tumor cells to try to get more accurate diagnoses, and sometimes even to find targets, specific targets for therapy. So a lot of what I do is that, at least for the clinical part of what I do. I also do a lot of teaching with residents and fellows in pathology and in neuropathology. I have some administrative work, certainly, as the chief of the division, and I do some research projects. So it's enough to make sure I don't get bored with anything. I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that throughout the day.
It sounds not boring and quite intriguing. So when you were a kid, you mentioned you played the guitar, you made some folk music, you were the lead singer in a rock band in high school. What brought you into classical music?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So when I was in the middle of high school and got together with some friends and we decided to put together the rock band, I was probably the least talented of the instrumentalists. My friend was much better at guitar than I was. And, we were talking about it and everybody says, well, I don't want to be the singer. I don't want to be the singer. And so it kind of came down to me to be the singer. And I had done some singing, but not much. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I really should get some training. So I joined the choir, started taking voice lessons, and just really enjoyed what I was doing. And later in college and onward, it was easier for me to sing in choirs and eventually do more solo work than it was to try to find a rock band, which is, takes a little more effort.
Yeah, that is quite a journey from rock over to classical. I imagine that neuropathology is pretty specialized, and it took you a long time and a lot of studying to get where you are.
Yeah.
How did music support you on that journey?
I always tell people that, music is what keeps me sane because it's so hectic in medicine. So I had a little bit of a break during my third year of medical school and maybe other shorter breaks where it just was way too busy for me to keep doing music. Because I was in the hospital all the time and just, if I wasn't in the hospital, I was trying to catch up on sleep. But most of the time, I continued to take voice lessons and sing in choirs, look for solo opportunities and things like that. And that was my main way of keeping sane. I don't do golf. I don't collect sports cars. So this is my one thing.
We definitely want a sane person on the end of, looking at a brain tumor. So that is good. You mentioned that the lifestyle of a medical student or a doctor, it can be so hectic, right? So many hours and nights. And as a singer, as you well know, your body is your instrument and you have to keep it healthy.
Right.
How have you managed to keep your singing voice healthy amidst this very demanding schedule?
I'm lucky because in pathology, there aren't that many emergencies. About the only thing that we have is what's called frozen sections, and that's when the neurosurgeon wants to get an initial impression at the diagnosis while they're still in the operating room. So most of that occurs during the day, but it certainly does sometimes occur at night or on the weekends, but it's not like being a surgeon or, some of the other specialties where you're constantly being called away. My dad was an OB-GYN, and it was so rare that he could actually finish a whole meal without at least going to the phone and, dealing with emergencies or, having to rush to the hospital or whatever. So I don't think it's been as challenging for me as like my dad, or if I was in some of the other specialties in terms of keeping my voice healthy. I think I'm like every other singer, always paranoid whenever a concert is getting closer. So I am very weary of anyone who has a cold or nowadays COVID or whatever, trying not to catch that. But otherwise, I don't think I have to do too much that's out of the ordinary to keep healthy.
It strikes me that you being a lyric tenor, which is one of the more rarer voice types, and then also your choice of neuropathology, which is a pretty specialized field. You chose two rare things, or maybe they chose you. How did you choose neuropathology as a field? Hi there, listener. Let's pause here for a moment so you can reflect on this question. How did you choose your field? Outside of hosting this podcast, I coach leaders in the workplace to navigate change, thrive in their roles, and stay true to their values. And I love working with ampersands. If any of this intrigues you, reach out to me at jessicawan.com. JESSICAWAN. Now, back to the show. How did you choose neuropathology as a field?
Yeah, that's another interesting story, I guess. I think most medical students go through a journey in terms of what they finally decide is going to be their specialty, and that was true with me as well. In college, initially, I got really excited about human genetics. And so I thought, I would become an MD PhD and study genetics. And I ended up doing a couple of summers of research that were particularly challenging and frustrating. And I thought, maybe that's really not what I want to do. And I talked to a bunch of my dad's friends since he was in the field and knew a lot of MD PhDs. And they said, you really don't have to have a PhD. You can do plenty of research with just an MD. So unless you really want to have your own laboratory, it's perfectly fine to be an MD. So I decided I would do that. And then my next thing was, okay, I love singing. I'm going to become an ENT and specialize in singers and work with opera singers or rock singers. And, and I like the anatomy and the head and neck. It's so interesting. And that's a competitive field. And so I had a mentor in medical school. And one of the things he told me was make sure to pay close attention in pathology because that's the bridge between basic science and clinical medicine. And they offered in our medical school between the second and third year an externship in autopsy pathology where you spend a couple of months being like a resident in a way and doing autopsies. So I went ahead and signed up for that, and I just ended up loving it way more than I thought I would. I really enjoyed the detective work of going through the clinical chart, thinking, what was it that everyone was thinking was going on at this point versus later on? What would I have thought? Would I have done anything different? And then you go in and you find out for yourself. And that's actually autopsy. That's what it means. It means seeing for yourself. And so I thought, well, maybe pathology's, not a bad field to go into. And then I think what clinched it was in the third year, all the surgical specialties. I remember at one point specifically when the intern was so excited and I was the medical student and said, they promised me that the next hernia repair, I get to do that. I get to be the primary surgeon and do a hernia repair. And I stopped and thought to myself, if someone told me right now I get to do the hernia repair in the next surgery, I just thought, it's not a big deal. And you spend so many hours in the operating room as a surgeon. I mean, if you don't absolutely love it, that's probably not the right field for you. So I changed my mind and decided to go into pathology. And once I did, I just felt that the brain was the most interesting of all the organs. And that's how I ended up in neuropathology.
What has studying the brain added to your thoughts and knowledge and feelings about singing?
I see somewhat of a parallel because no matter how experienced I am, no matter how much I read, I am never going to know everything there is to know about the brain, which I totally love. I love being a teacher, but I also love being a student for the rest of my life. So I'm always learning something new, which is really awesome when you're dealing with something as complicated as the brain. And the same is absolutely 100% true in music. I mean, I haven't put the same amount of time into studying music, but it doesn't really matter however much time I put into it and try to make myself a better singer and a better musician. I'm always learning and I'm always going to be a student. So I think there's a parallel between the two that I really enjoy.
What about the human body or even the process of autopsies or I'm thinking the word dissection comes to mind.
Yeah.
Is there anything with that process that you kind of see yourself also doing when you learn a new piece of music or how you approach singing?
Yeah, that's a great observation, I think. So I actually don't end up doing very many autopsies anymore, but you're absolutely right that there's this parallel that, when you have a new piece of music, you're just starting and you're looking at it and you see all the black notes on the sheet and how do I get that to be an actual piece of music? I think you do dissect every phrase and how does it go together and dissect the lyrics and how do I bring that to life? And, most of the teachers I've had kind of look at it that way too. And I think sometimes they've made that connection and say, this is just like what you do at work. Dissect out that vowel. What is that French vowel? What are the components of that French vowel? Or, how does this G natural fit into the chord and sound completely different 2 measures later, the same G natural in a completely different chord with a different feeling. And so I have had teachers make that connection, and I guess I've made the connection somewhat myself, that it's very similar in terms of dissecting out the components that before you can see the big picture.
Mm. What do you think music can teach us about the brain?
That is an excellent question. And I bet my friend Heidi Moss could answer that a lot better than I could. But
I did her interview this week, by the way.
oh, awesome, awesome. She would be an awesome person to interview. But I don't look into the neuroscience as much as Heidi does in terms of all the different aspects of music. But I think we're using so many different systems in our brain in music, and people have just in a very simplistic way looked at that with PET scans. For example, when you look at a novice person maybe humming a tune or doing something, and a professional musician, and just so many different areas of their brain light up in the professional musician, in the language area and the emotional areas and the processing areas, visual processing. And even if you're not looking at the music, all of those areas really light up on a PET scan. So I think it is kind of interesting. There are a few people that study exactly that, the circuitry and the connection of the neuroscience of music, basically.
Let's talk about neuropathology songs. How
Sure.
did that idea come to fruition?
Yeah, that was a funny story. So I was a second-year resident when this first happened, and we had a weekly conference between the residents and the faculty at a multi-headed microscope where everybody could see what's under the microscope at the same time. And every week for 1 hour, the residents would present interesting cases to the faculty and say, this is what I'm seeing. This is how we decided to work this up to try to get the answer, the final diagnosis, and etc. So it was an educational conference with our faculty who were our mentors. And one day, the attendance had been going down, and one of the faculty kind of blurted out, well, the residents aren't entertaining enough. And so of course I saw that as throwing the glove down on the ground. This was the challenge. I couldn't take that lying down. So, so that weekend, I decided I was going to show what's called a schwannoma, which is a type of benign tumor of the nerves. I had a case, but I decided that weekend I was going to compose a schwannoma song with my guitar. And so I did. And so the next week I brought my guitar, and at the microscope I showed the case, and then I pulled out my guitar and I sang the schwannoma song. And everybody that was walking by in the hallway was like, "Oh my God, what is going on?" And they all came in. And, by the time I finished, there were probably 3 times as many people as when I started. And I just thought to myself, this is a great way to teach. And so later on, when I'm teaching medical students and residents, I think this would be a great way to use this as an extra tool for teaching the key features of different diseases of the brain and spinal cord. Another reason I thought it would be particularly effective is because I think musical memories last a lot longer than just rote memory. And we do a lot of rote memory in medical school. I mean, I was sitting in thousands of hours of lectures and trying to memorize, I don't know how many thousands of bits of trivia, probably 90% at least of which I've now forgotten. But, the musical memories have an overlay of emotion. And so they are more powerful and they tend to stick a lot longer. And not everybody likes to use music for learning, but a lot of people do. And so I think, a lot of the students and residents I've taught have commented they enjoy using that as just another tool.
How does music currently play a role in your day-to-day life? How are you balancing these two worlds of music and medicine?
It has always been a very important part of my life. I tell people that medicine is my day job and music is my night job. I always try to do at least a little bit of singing every day. I don't always succeed, but at night and on the weekends, I practice and I listen to new music, or I look at sheet music and think about what do I want to do next? What's going to make me a better singer? I work with my teacher, Christy Springer. I've been consistently taking a class at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music on vocal performance. That's how I met Heidi. She was the teacher of that class. So all of this keeps me going. I really enjoy it. And I remember many, many years ago, I heard someone say, that medicine is really astonishing and it's amazing all the progress we've made and being able to keep people alive a lot longer than we used to. But music is why we live in the first place. And I kind of like that.
That's beautiful. As you know, this show is all about exploring what it's like to straddle two worlds and to be an ampersand. What do you think should be in the ampersand manifesto?
Never let go of your dreams would be something to put in the manifesto. Someone who's a physician, I may not be able to sing in a big opera house or Carnegie Hall, or, I don't have the time to learn a big complex work and go to all the rehearsals, but there's still lots of other things that I can do. And music has always been my dream. And so it doesn't matter how busy you are. If you love it, you find time for it. So that's kind of what I've tried to do to keep that dream going, even though it's my night job and not my day job.
Arie, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom with us. Folks, you can check out Arie's neuropathology songs on YouTube and learn more about Arie on UCSF's faculty website. If you liked this show, hit like, subscribe, and share with your friends and fellow ampersands. I had a chance to reflect on my interview with Arie and wanted to share a few key takeaways. He shared a few times that music is what keeps him sane. I certainly can relate to this sentiment. Music is also an important part of my own mental wellness. It's interesting to think of the arts, or more broadly, the quote-unquote night job, not just as something you do on the side, but actually as an essential counterweight to a hectic and demanding career. Maybe we ampersands need that counterweight, and it actually makes us better at what we do because we're in a higher state of fulfillment. Never letting go of your dream. Even though Arie has a big job in medicine, he's able to perform, to learn, and to tap into that richness of creativity and expression. His dream is being fulfilled, not because he's on a particular stage in an opera house, but because he's singing. And lastly, carving out your own path. Medicine is known for being pretty structured. You have to go to med school, pick a specialty, practice in a certain way. But I don't know anyone else who's singing songs about neuropathology. Because Arie's able to straddle these two worlds of medicine and music, he's created a totally new way of teaching that breaks the status quo. It's actually kind of rebellious and completely refreshing.
Is this an astro? Is this an oligo? Some cells are rounded, but then others just aren't so. Open your eyes to future pathology. I'm just a ONG, but I can integrate my immunos with histology, don't you know?